I do not like Winston Peters. It could even be said that I despise Winston Peters. His sad collection of virtue-signalling policies, his desperate attempts at importing cancerous American culture wars, his obsession with bashing minorities and appealing to the worst people in New Zealand, the laughable corruption of his party. I have spoken about these things at length. I do not like Winston Peters. He can be charming and charismatic, but for the most part I consider him to be an embarrassment. However, I will say one positive thing about Winston Peters. For all of his flaws, I am very happy that he is part of this dreadful government. He has effectively stopped the government from being even worse. If it was not for Winston Peters, this government would be far worse. There would be no counterbalance to the ACT Party. They would have far more power and a far greater ability to implement their agenda of brutal economic reform. The government would have abolished the foreign buyers ban. In the midst of a housing crisis, letting foreign buyers into the country is moronic. This handout to rich foreigners would have come at the expense of ordinary New Zealanders. This would have increased competition in the housing market and made things even harder for first home buyers who would face greater competition as a result of the knock-on effects of foreign buyers. Bringing New Zealand to market simply to fund tax cuts was a terrible idea, and I am pleased that Winston prevented it. Winston Peters seems to have also stopped the government from raising the retirement age. This is good. National and ACT want to raise the retirement age because they would rather make old people work than raise taxes on their rich donors to properly fund pensions. Thankfully, Winston had other ideas, and it seems the retirement age will not be increased. Winston has stood in the path of the deranged economic agenda of ACT and National. It is well known that Winston dislikes privatisation, deregulation, and major cuts to social spending. It is well known that National likes these things, and ACT loves these things. I am pleased that Winston is around to stop them from causing total economic destruction with their deranged economic agenda. Without Winston Peters, this would be an ACT Party-dominated government. Winston Peters is the counterbalance, and he is a very necessary counterbalance. This is not to praise Winston Peters too heavily. Being a lesser evil within a horrendous government is hardly an amazing achievement. Being better than the ACT Party is hardly something to be proud of. But it is important to recognise that Winston's presence has been a good thing, at least up until this point. He has said and done a lot of stupid stuff, but he has also countered the insanity of ACT. This is not an endorsement of Winston. New Zealand deserves better. This government is terrible. Thanks to Winston, they are substantially less terrible than they would have otherwise been, but they are still terrible. The only thing standing between us and brutal economic reform should not be a cynical old man. But that is the way things are. In 2026, we must aim for a better political arrangement. An arrangement where we are not teetering on the edge of a cliff. An arrangement where we are not reliant on an old fool like Winston Peters.